It all started on a Saturday morning that I had been looking forward to all week. The kind of morning where the air is fresh, the sky is painted in soft orange and pink, and everything feels peaceful. I woke up early, grabbed a cup of coffee, and stepped out onto my porch. From where I stood, I could see the sun rising over the hills, casting its golden light across my land. My ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, about 50 acres of rolling fields, woods, and right in the middle of it, a sparkling lake that had been in my family for generations. That lake wasn't just water to me, it was part of my history. I had memories of my father and grandfather taking me down there as a kid, teaching me how to fish, telling me stories, and showing me how to respect the land. That morning, all I wanted was a few quiet hours to fish like I used to clear my mind and enjoy what my family had passed down to me. I grabbed my fishing rod, an old one that had belonged to my dad, and made my way down to the lake. The walk was peaceful, with birds singing and the smell of pine and wildflowers in the air. I set up at my favorite spot, under the big oak tree that had probably been standing there for 100 years or more. I cast my line out into the water, sat down on an old log, and took a deep breath. The world felt right in that moment, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But that peace didn't last for long. I heard the faint sound of a car engine getting closer, the crunch of tires on gravel, and I turned around to see an SUV pulling up near the lake. At first I thought maybe it was a neighbor stopping by to say hello, but then I saw who stepped out and my heart sank a little. It was Karen, the president of the local HOA. Now, let me be clear, my ranch isn't part of any HOA. The development she runs is on the other side of the main road, far away from my land. But over the years, Karen had made it her mission to stick her nose where it didn't belong. She had tried to tell people what kind of fences they could put up, where they could park, and even how their houses should look, even if they weren't in her HOA. And now, here she was, marching toward me like she owned the place. She didn't even bother with a polite hello. Instead, she came right up to me, hands on her hips, her face red and angry. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her voice loud and sharp enough to scare the birds out of the trees. I was taken aback. "I'm fishing," I said calmly, trying not to let her rudeness ruin my morning. "On my own lake?" Karen shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "This is HOA property. You can't be here. You're trespassing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stood up, still holding my fishing rod, and looked her in the eye. "Karen, this is my land. This lake has been part of my ranch for decades. I'm not trespassing, I'm home." But she wasn't listening. It was like she had made up her mind and didn't care about the truth. "I'm calling the cops," she said, pulling out her phone. "Let's see what the sheriff has to say about this." I could feel my blood starting to boil, but I kept my cool. I knew the law was on my side. I knew exactly where my property lines were because I'd seen the surveys, the deeds, and the maps. This wasn't just some backyard pond. This was a lake that had belonged to my family long before there was ever an HOA on the other side of that road. Karen didn't wait for a reply. She walked back to her SUV, phone pressed to her ear, talking fast and loud, probably hoping I'd get scared and leave before the cops showed up. But I wasn't going anywhere. I sat back down, reeled in my line, and cast it again, determined not to let her ruin my day. While I waited for the deputies to arrive, I thought about how ridiculous this whole thing was. How could someone be so bold as to come onto land that didn't belong to them and accuse the actual owner of trespassing? I tried to understand what was going through her mind. Maybe she truly believed the HOA had rights to this lake. Or maybe, deep down, she just didn't like the idea of anyone doing something without her permission. Either way, I knew this was about more than just fishing. It was about standing up for what was rightfully mine. The minutes felt like hours as I sat there, watching the ripples on the lake and listening for the sound of sirens. Finally, I heard the familiar hum of a sheriff's vehicle coming down the gravel path. 2 deputies stepped out, both of them I recognized from town. They were good guys, always fair, and I felt a little relief seeing them. Karen ran up to them like she'd just caught a criminal. "There he is," she cried, pointing at me like I was some kind of thief. "He's trespassing on HOA land. I want him arrested." The deputies exchanged a look, clearly confused. One of them, Deputy Williams, stepped forward and addressed me politely. "Morning, sir. Can you tell us what's going on here?" I nodded. "Sure thing, officer. This is my land. I own this ranch, including the lake. I've got the deed in my house if you'd like to see it." Karen wasn't having it. "That's not true. This lake is part of our community park. He has no right to be here." The deputies stayed calm, but I could see they weren't buying her story without proof. Deputy Williams said, "Ma'am, do you have any documents showing that this is HOA property?" Karen's face turned redder. "I don't need documents. I know it's ours. I'm the HOA president." That was when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was someone who thought their word was law, and in that moment, I knew I was going to have to prove, once and for all, that I wasn't the trespasser here. The 2 deputies stood there, looking between me and Karen, trying to make sense of the situation. Deputy Williams, a man I'd seen around town many times, stayed calm as he spoke. "All right, sir, if you say this is your property, can you show us the paperwork? We just want to get to the bottom of this and clear it up." I nodded, still holding my fishing rod, and said, "Of course. My house is right up that path. I have the deed, survey maps, and everything else you need to see." Karen crossed her arms tight across her chest and let out an exasperated sigh. "You don't need to see anything. I'm telling you, this is HOA land. I'm the president, and I'm ordering him off the property. Arrest him." But the deputies weren't about to just take her word for it. They'd been called out enough times to know that not everything is as it first seems. Deputy Williams spoke gently but firmly. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone just because you say so. We need to see proof. Please let us do our job." Karen's face turned even redder, and she huffed like a kettle about to boil over. "Fine, but when you see that I'm right, I want him charged." I led the deputies up the short path to my house, which sat on a small hill overlooking the lake. As we walked, I explained, "This ranch has been in my family for over 70 years. My grandfather bought it before there was even a development on that side of the road. The lake's always been ours. There's never been any agreement or sale to the HOA. They have no claim to any of this land." The deputies listened carefully, and I could tell they were taking everything in without jumping to conclusions. When we got to my house, I invited them inside and went straight to my study. I pulled out a thick folder from the cabinet, filled with property records, the original deed signed by my grandfather, and recent survey maps that clearly showed my boundaries, including the lake. I laid everything out on the table. Deputy Williams and his partner, Deputy Allen, looked over the papers quietly, checking the names, dates, and official seals. After a few minutes, Williams looked up at me and nodded. "This is all in order. The lake is clearly part of your property. There's no question about it." We made our way back down toward the lake, where Karen was pacing, arms flailing as she talked on her phone, probably updating someone on what she thought was her big win. When she saw us return, she put the phone down and demanded, "Well, are you going to arrest him now?" Deputy Williams shook his head. "Ma'am, we've seen the paperwork. This ranch, including the lake, belongs to him. The HOA has no claim to this land." Karen blinked, stunned. "That can't be. That lake is on our maps. It's part of our community space." Williams stayed calm but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The official documents don't support that. The HOA property ends well before his land begins. In fact, you're standing on private property right now." It was like watching the wind get knocked out of her. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She looked around like she couldn't believe what she was hearing, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. This must be a mistake," she muttered. "We were told we could use this lake." Williams shook his head again. "If there's any doubt, you can check with your HOA's lawyer. But from what we've seen, this isn't community land and you actually need to leave, or we'll have to report you for trespassing." That was when Karen's defiance cracked. Her shoulders slumped a little, and she seemed to deflate, realizing she wasn't going to get her way this time. But even then, she couldn't quite admit she was wrong. "I was just trying to protect community property," she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "We appreciate that you care about your community, ma'am," Deputy Williams said, "but it's important to have the facts before making accusations. This man's fishing on his own land." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and slammed the door so hard the whole vehicle shook. She started the engine and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air. Long after she was gone, the deputies stayed a few more minutes, making sure everything was calm. Williams apologized for the trouble. "Sorry about that, sir. Some folks get a little too eager to enforce rules that don't apply." I chuckled, finally feeling the tension leave my body. "No hard feelings, deputy. I appreciate you handling it fairly. Just doing our job," he said with a smile. They headed out, leaving me standing by the lake with my fishing rod in hand. I looked out at the water, the surface rippling in the breeze, and felt a wave of relief. The peace I'd been craving all morning finally returned. But as I sat back down and cast my line again, I couldn't help but think about what had just happened. Karen had called the cops on me, on my own land, convinced she had the right to control what wasn't hers. And the craziest part, she truly believed it until the truth smacked her in the face. I wondered how things had gotten to this point, how someone could become so power-hungry that they'd forget basic respect for others' property. But I also felt grateful that the deputies had been fair and level. They could have shown up and jumped to conclusions, but they didn't. They took the time to look at the facts. And in the end, the truth came out. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I reeled in my line, feeling the tug of a fish on the hookah. Small victory that felt extra sweet that day. And as I brought it in, I thought about how important it is to stand your ground. Because sometimes, the people who point the finger at you are the ones who need to look in the mirror. And sometimes, the real trespassers are the ones who think they're in charge. Karen's SUV disappeared down the dirt road, leaving behind a thick cloud of dust that slowly settled over the path like a reminder of the storm she'd tried to create. I stood there for a moment, staring out across my lake, feeling the cool breeze rush against my face. The water glimmered under the late morning sun, peaceful and undisturbed now that the chaos had passed. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself, realizing that despite all the drama, I was right where I wanted to be, with my fishing rod in hand and not a soul left to bother me. I sat back down on the old log under the oak tree, cast my line, and let the rhythm of the water calm my nerves. Every ripple in the lake reminded me of simpler times of mornings spent with my dad teaching me how to bait a hook, of quiet afternoons when my grandpa would tell me stories about how he built this ranch with his own hands. This wasn't just about fishing. This lake, this land, it was a part of me, a part of my family's legacy, and no HOA president or self-important neighbor was going to take that away. But as I fished, I couldn't help but replay everything that had happened. The way Karen had marched in, so sure of herself, convinced she had power over land that didn't belong to her. The way she had tried to use her title to control me. It was a reminder of how people like that could let their positions get to their heads, thinking they could bend the world to their will just because they had a little authority somewhere else. But this wasn't her neighborhood. This was my home, and I wasn't about to let anyone tell me what I could or couldn't do on my own property. A couple of days passed, and I figured that was the end of it. I thought maybe Karen would be too embarrassed to show her face again, that she'd realize her mistake and move on. But then I got a letter in the mail. I opened the envelope and felt my stomach turn as I read it. It was from the HOA, not just Karen, but the whole board. They claimed the lake was part of their community plan and that they intended to include it as a shared amenity for the residents of their subdivision. According to the letter, they believed the lake fell within their expanded borders. Even though they had no legal documents to support that claim, it was unbelievable. After everything that had happened, they were still trying to take what wasn't theirs. I shook my head, realizing that this wasn't just about Karen's pride. This was about the HOA trying to get their hands on something they thought would raise the value of their neighborhood, something they hadn't worked for, something they didn't own. I wasn't about to let that slide. I called my lawyer, a sharp no-nonsense woman named Rachel, who had handled my family's land matters for years. I showed her the letter and explained everything that had happened. Rachel didn't waste a second. She sent the HOA a firm legal notice, backed by property records, survey maps, and deeds that clearly showed the lake belonged to me and had never been part of any community plan. The notice warned them to back off or face legal action. The HOA tried to push back at first. They sent more letters, tried to argue their case with vague claims and outdated maps that didn't match any official records. But Rachel was ready for every move they made. She countered with facts, documents, and the law on our side. Within a few weeks, it was over. The HOA formally withdrew their claim. I received another letter, this time an apology. Though it felt forced and hollow, word got around fast. People in the HOA community started talking about what had happened. It turned out, Karen's stunt at my lake had caused a lot of anger among the homeowners she was supposed to represent. Many of them were tired of her pushing boundaries, tired of her acting like she owned the whole town. The pressure became too much, and not long after, Karen resigned as HOA president. Some said she left to avoid further embarrassment. Others said the board encouraged her to step down quietly. Either way, she was gone, and from what I heard, most folks in that neighborhood were relieved. For me, life went back to normal. I kept fishing on my lake, enjoying the peace that I'd fought to protect. Every time I walked down to the water, I felt a deeper appreciation for what I had, the land my grandfather had worked so hard for, the home my father had helped maintain, the lake that held so many of my memories. But I also felt proud that I'd stood up for myself, for my family, and for what was right. I could have backed down. I could have let the HOA push me around, but I didn't. And that made every cast of my fishing rod feel like a little victory. Looking back, the whole experience taught me something important. No matter how loud or powerful someone seems, the truth will always stand stronger. Karen thought her title gave her control over everything around her. But titles don't change facts. The law doesn't bend for someone just because they're used to getting their way. And property, especially property earned, worked for, and protected by generations, should never be taken for granted. These days, when neighbors drive by, they wave. Some even stop to chat, asking how the fishing is or complimenting the view of the lake. There's no more trouble, no more threats, just respect. And as for me, I fish a little longer, sit a little quieter, and remind myself every day how lucky I am to have this place. So if there's one thing I'd tell anyone watching or listening to this story, it's this: know your rights. Stand up for what's yours, because sometimes the people who accuse you of being in the wrong are the ones who've crossed the line. And when you know the truth, don't be afraid to defend it, because nothing feels better than knowing you protected what matters most.